The materialist denial under the two negations. The Materialist Denial by Sri Aurobindo, The Life Divine, which was written way back in 1914. The two negation, the materialist denial. He energized conscious force in the austerity of thought and came to the knowledge that matter is the Brahman. For from matter all existence are born. Born by matter they increase and enter into matter in their passing. Hence, then he went to Varuna, his father, and said, Lord, teach me of the Brahman. But he said to him, energize again the conscious energy in thee, for the energy is Brahman. Taittiriya Upanishad. The affirmation of a divine life upon earth and an immortal sense in mortal existence can have no base unless we recognize not only eternal spirit as the inhabitant of this bodily mansion, the wearer of this mutable robe, but accept matter of which it is made as a fit and noble material out of which he weaves constantly his garbs, builds recurrently the unending series of his mansions. Nor is this even enough to guard us against a recoil from life in the body, unless with the Upanishads perceiving behind their appearance the identity in essence of these two extreme terms of existence, we are able to say in the very language of those ancient writings, matter also is Brahman, and to give its full value to the vigorous figure by which the physical universe is described as the external body of the divine being. Nor so far divided apparently are the two extreme terms is that identification convincing to the rational intellect if we refuse to recognize a series of ascending terms, life, mind, supermind, and the grades that link mind to supermind between spirit and matter. Otherwise, the two must appear as reconcilable opponents bound together in an unhappy wedlock, and their divorce that one reasonable solution. To identify them, to represent each in the terms of the others, becomes an artificial creation of thought opposed to the logic of facts and possible only by an irrational mysticism. If we assert only pure spirit and a mechanical, unintelligent substance or energy, calling one God or soul and the other nature, the inevitable end will be that we shall either deny God or else turn from nature. For both thought and life, a choice then becomes imperative. Though thought comes to deny the one as an illusion of the imagination and the other as an illusion of the senses, life comes to fix on the immaterial and flee from itself in a disgust and a self-forgetting ecstasy, or else to deny its own immortality and take its orientation away from God and towards the animal. Purusha and Prakriti, the passively luminous soul of the Sankhyas and the mechanically active energy have nothing in common, not even their opposite modes of inertia. Their antinomies can only be resolved by the cessation of the inertly driven activity into the immutable repose upon which it has been casting in vain the sterile procession of its images. Shankara's wordless, inactive self and his Maya of many names and forms are equally disparate and irreconcilable entities. Their rigid antagonism can terminate only by dissolution of the multitudinous illusion into the sole truth of an eternal silence. The materialist has an easier field. It is possible for him by denying spirit to arrive at a more readily convincing simplicity of statement, a real monism, the monism of matter or else of force. But in the rigidity of statement, it is impossible for him to persist permanently. He too ends by positing an unknowable as inert, as remote from the known universe as the passive Purusa or the silent Atman. It serves no purpose but to put off by a vague concession the inexorable demands of thought or to stand as an excuse for refusing to extend the limits of enquiry. Therefore, in these barren contradictions, the human mind cannot rest satisfied. It must seek always a complete affirmation. It can find it only by a luminous reconciliation. To reach that reconciliation, it must traverse the degrees which our inner consciousness impose on us, and whether by objective method of analysis applied to life and mind as to matter, or by subjective synthesis and illumination arrive at the repose of the ultimate unity without denying the energy of the expressive multiplicity. Only in such a complete and catholic affirmation can all the multiform and apparently contradictory data of existence be harmonized and the manifold conflicting forces which governs our thought and life discover the central truth which they are here to symbolize and variously fulfill. Then only can our thoughts have attained a true center, ceasing to wander in circles, work like the Brahman of the Upanishad, fixed and stable even in its play and its worldwide coursing, and our life, knowing its aim, serve it with a serene and subtle joy and light as well as with a rhythmically discursive energy. But when the rhythm has once been disturbed, it is necessary and helpful that men should test separately in their extreme assertion each of the two great opposites. It is the mind's natural way of returning more perfectly to the affirmation it has lost. On the road, it may attempt to rest in the intervening degrees, reducing all things into the terms of an original life energy or of sensation or of ideas. But these exclusive solutions have always an air of unreality. They may satisfy for a time the logical reason which deals only with pure ideas, but they cannot satisfy the mind's sense of actuality. For the mind knows that there is something behind itself which is not the idea. It knows, on the other hand, that there is something within itself which is more than the vital breath. Either spirit or matter can give it for a time some sense of ultimate reality, not so any of the principles that intervene. It must therefore go to the extremes before it can return fruitfully upon the whole. For by its very nature, served by a sense that can perceive with distinctness only the parts of existence, and by a speech that only can achieve distinctness only when it carefully divides and limits, the intellect is driven, having before it its multiplicity of elemental principles, to seek unity by reducing all ruthlessly to the terms of one. It attempts practically, in order to assert this one, to get rid of the others, to perceive the real source of their identity. Without the exclusive process, it must either have overleaped itself or must have completed the circuit, only to find that all equally reduce themselves to that which escapes definition or description, and is yet not only real but attainable. By whatever road we may travel, that is always the end at which we arrive, and we can only escape it by refusing to complete the journey. It is therefore of good augury that after many experiments and verbal solution, we should now find ourselves standing today in the presence of the two that have alone borne for long and the most rigorous test of experience, the two extremes, and that at the end of the experience both should have come to a result which the universal instinct in mankind, the real judge, sentinel, and representative of the universal spirit of truth, refuses to accept as right or as satisfying. In Europe and in India, respectively, the negation of the materialist and the refusal of the ascetic has sought to assert themselves as the sole truth and to dominate the conception of life. In India, if the result has been a great heaping up of the treasures of the spirit, or of some of them, it has also been a great bankruptcy of life. In Europe, the fullness of riches and the triumphant mastery of this world's power and possession have progressed towards an equal bankruptcy in the things of the spirit. Nor has the intellect, which sought the solution of all problems in the one term of matter, found satisfaction in the answer that it has received. Therefore, the time grows ripe, and the tendency of the world moves towards a new and comprehensive affirmation in thought and in inner and outer experience, and to its corollary, a new and rich self fulfillment in an integral human existence for the individual and for the race. From the difference in the relations of spirit and matter to the unknowable which they both represent, there arises also a difference of effectiveness in the material and the spiritual negations. The denial of the materialists, although more insistent and immediately successful, more facile in its appeal to the generality of mankind, is yet less enduring, less effective, finally, than the absorbing and perilous refusal of the ascetic, for it carries within itself its own cure, its most powerful element is the agnosticism, which, admitting the unknowable behind all manifestation, extends the limits of the unknowable until it comprehends all that is merely unknown. Its premise is that the physical sense are our sole means of knowledge, and that reason, therefore, even in its most extended and vigorous flights, cannot escape beyond their domain. It must deal always and solely with the facts that they provide or suggest, and the suggestion themselves must always be kept tied to their origins. We cannot go beyond. We cannot use them as a bridge leading us into a domain where more powerful and less limited faculties come into play, and another kind of enquiry has to be instituted. A premier so arbitrary pronounce on itself its own sentence of insufficiency, it can only be maintained by ignoring or explaining away all that vast field of evidence and experience which contradicts it, denying or disparaging noble and useful faculties, active consciously or obscurely or at worst latent in all human beings, and refusing to investigate supraphysical phenomena except as manifested in relation to matter and its movements, and conceived as a subordinate activity of material forces. As soon as we begin to investigate the operations of mind and of supermind in themselves, and without the prejudgment that is determined from the beginning to see in them only a subordinate term of matter, we come into contact with a mass of phenomena which escapes entirely from its rigid hold, the limiting dogmatism of the materialist formula. And the moment we recognize as our enlarging experience compels us to recognize that there are in the universe knowable realities beyond the range of the senses, and in men powers and faculties which determine rather than are determined by the material organs through which they hold themselves in touch with the world of the senses, that outer shell of our true and complete existence. The premise of materialistic agnosticism disappears. We are really for a larger statement and an ever developing inquiry. But first, it is well that we should recognize the enormous and indispensable utility of the very brief period of rationalistic materialism, through which humanity has been passing. For that vast field of evidence and experience which now begins to reopen its gates to us can only be safely entered when the intellect has been severely trained to a clear austerity. Seized on by unripe minds, it lends itself to the most perilous distortions and misleading imaginations, and actually in the past encrusted a real nucleus of truth with such an accretion of perverting superstitions and irrationalizing dogmas that all advance in true knowledge was rendered impossible. It became necessary for a time to make a clean sweep at once of the truth and its disguise, in order that the road might be clear for a new departure and a surer advance. The rationalistic tendency of materialism has done mankind this great service. For the faculties that transcend the senses by the very fact of their being immersed in matter, mission to work in a physical body, put in harness to draw one car, along with the emotional desires and nervous impulse, are exposed to a mixed functioning in which they are in danger of illuminating confusion rather than clarifying truth. Especially in this mixed functioning, dangerous when men with unchastened minds and unpurified sensibilities attempt to rise into the higher domains of spiritual experience. In what reasons of uns- unsubstantial cloud and semi-brilliant fog, or a murk visited by flashes which blind more than they enlighten, do they not lose themselves by that rash and premature adventure, an adventure necessary indeed in the way in which nature chooses to effect her advance, for she amuses herself as she works, but still for the reason rash and premature. It is necessary, therefore, that advancing knowledge should base herself on a clear, pure, and disciplined intellect. It is necessary, too, that she should correct her error sometimes by a return to the restraint of sensible fact, the concrete realities of the physical world. The touch of earth is always reinvigorating to the son of earth, even when he seeks a supraphysical knowledge. It may even be said that supraphysical can only be really mastered in its fullness. To its height we can always reach when we keep our feet firmly on the physical. Earth is his footing, says the Upanishad, whenever it images the self that manifests in the universe. And it is certainly the fact that the wider we extend and the surer we make our knowledge of the physical world, the wider and surer becomes our foundation of the higher knowledge, even the highest, even for the Brahma Vidya. In emerging, therefore, out of the materialistic period of human knowledge, we must be careful that we do not rashly condemn what we are leaving, or throw away even one title of its gain before we can summon perception and power that are well grasped and secure to occupy their place. Rather, we shall observe with respect and wonder the work that atheism has done for the divine, and admire the service that agnosticism has rendered in preparing the illimitable increase of knowledge. In our world, error is continually the handmaid and pathfinder of truth, for error is really a half truth that stumbles because of its limitation. Often it is truth that wears a disguise in order to arrive unobserved near to its goal. Well, if it could always be as it has been in the great period we are living, the faithful handmaid, severe consciousness, clean handed, luminous within its limits, a half truth and not a reckless and presumptuous aberration. A certain kind of agnosticism is the final truth of all knowledge. For when we come to the end of whatever path, the universe appears as only a symbol or an appearance of an unknowable reality which translates itself here into different system of values, physical values, vital and sensational values, intellectual, ideal and spiritual values. The more that becomes real to us, the more it is seen to be always beyond defining thought and beyond formulating expression. Mind attains not there, nor speech, and yet, as it is possible to exaggerate with the illusionist the unreality of the appearance, so it is possible to exaggerate the unknowable of the knowable. When we speak of it as unknowable, we mean really that it escapes the grasp of our thought and speech instruments, which proceed always by the sense of difference and expressed by the way of definition. But if not knowable by thought, it is attainable by a supreme effort of consciousness. There is even a kind of knowledge which is one with identity and by which, in a sense, it can be known. Certainly, that knowledge cannot be reproduced successfully in the term of thought and speech. But when we have attained to it, the result of a re-evaluation of that in the symbols of our cosmic consciousness, not only in one, but in all the ranges of symbol, which results in a revolution of our internal being and through the internal of our external life. Moreover, there is also a kind of knowledge through which that does reveal itself by all that names and form of phenomenal existence which to the ordinary intelligence only conceal it. It is this higher but not highest process of knowledge to which we can attain by passing the limits of the materialist formula and scrutinizing life, mind, and supermind in the phenomena that are characteristics of them and not merely in those subordinate movements by which they link themselves to matter. The unknown is not the unknowable. It need not remain the unknown for us unless we choose ignorance or persist in our first limitation. For to all things that are unknowable, all things in the universe that correspond in that universe, faculties which can take cognitions of them, and in man, the microcosm, these faculties are always existent and at a certain stage capable of development. We may choose not to develop them where they are partially developed. We may discourage and impose on them a kind of atrophy, but fundamentally, all possible knowledge is knowledge within the power of humanity, and since in men there is the inalienable impulse of nature towards self realization, no struggle of the intellect to limit the action of our capabilities and a determined area can for all prevail. When we have proved matter and realized its secret capacities, the very knowledge which has found its convenience is that temporary limitation must cry to us like the Vedic restrainers, fought now and push forward also in other fields. If modern materialism were simply an unintelligent equations in the material life, the advance might be indefinitely delayed. But since its very soul in the search of knowledge, it will be unable to cry a halt as it reaches the barriers of sense knowledge and of reasoning from sense knowledge. It very rush will carry it beyond, and the rapidity and sureness with which it had embraced the visible universe is only an earnest of the energy and success which we may hope to see repeated in the conquest of what lies beyond. Once a stride is taken that cross the crosses the barrier, we see already that advance in its obscure beginnings, not only in the one final conception, but in the great line of its general results. Knowledge, by whatever path it is followed, tends to become one. Nothing can be more remarkable and suggestive than the extent to which modern science confirms in the domain of matter that the conceptions and even the very formulae of language that were arrived at by a Very different method in the Vedanta, the original Vedanta, not of the school of metaphysical philosophy but of the Upanishad, and this, on the other hand, often reveal their full significance, their richer content only when they are viewed in the new light shed by the discoveries of modern science. For instance, that Vedantic expression which describes things in the cosmos as one seed arranged by the universal energies in multitudinous forms. Significant especially is the drive of science towards monism, which is consistent with multiplicity, towards the Vedic idea of the one essence with its many becomings. Even if the dualistic appearance of matter and form be insisted on, it does not really stand in the way of this monism, for it will be evident that essential matter is a thing non existent to the senses and only like the pradhana of Sankhya's a conceptual form of substance, and in fact, the point is increasingly reached where only an arbitrary distinction in thought divides form of substance from form of energy. Matter expresses itself eventually as a formulation of some unknown force. Life, too, that yet unfathomed mystery, begins to reveal itself as an obscure energy of sensibility imprisoned in its material formulation, and when the dividing ignorance is cured, which gives us the sense of a gulf between life and matter, it is difficult to suppose that mind, life, and matter will be found to be anything else than one energy triply formulated, the triple word of the Vedic seers. Nor will the conception that then be able to endure of a brute material force as the mother of mind. The energy that creates the world can be nothing else than a will, and will is only consciousness applying itself to a work and a result. What is that work and result if not self involution of consciousness in form and a self involution out of the form, so as to actualize some mighty possibility in the universe which it has created? And what is its will in man if not a will to unending life, to unbounded knowledge, to unfettered power? Science itself begins to dream of the physical conquest of death, expresses an insatiable thirst for knowledge, is working out something like a terrestrial omnipotence for humanity. Space and time are contracting to the vanishing point in its works, and it strives in 100 ways to make man the master of circumstance and so lighten the fetters of casualty. The idea of limit of the impossible begins to grow a little shadowy, and it appears instead that whatever man constantly wills, he must in the end be able to do, for the consciousness in the race eventually finds the means. It is not in the individual that this omnipotence expresses itself, but the collective will of mankind that works out with the individual as a means. And yet, when we look more deeply, it is not any conscious will of the collectivity, but a superconscious might that uses the individual as a center and means, the collectivity as a condition and field. Okay, let me repeat this. And yet, when we look more deeply, it is not any conscious will of the collectivity, but a superconscious might that uses the individual as a center and means, the collectivity as a condition and field. What is this but the God in man, the infinite identity, the multitudinous unity, the omniscient, the omnipotent, who, having made man in his own image, with the ego as a center of working, with the race, the collective Narayana, the Vis- Visvamanava, as the mold and circumscription seeks to express in them some image of the unity, omniscience, omnipotence, which are the self conception of the divine, that which is immortal in mortals is a God and established inwardly as an energy working out in our divine powers. It is this vast cosmic impulse which the modern world, without quite knowing its own aim, yet serves in all its activities and labors subconsciously to fulfill. But there is always a limit and an accum- en- encumbrance, the limit of the material field in the knowledge, the encumbrance of the material machinery in the power. But here also the latest trend is highly significant of a freer future as the outposts of the scientific knowledge come more and more to be set on the border that divide the material from the immaterial. So also the highest achievements of practical science are those which tend to simplify and reduce to the vanishing point the machinery by which the greatest effects are produced. Wireless telegraphy is nature's exterior sign and pretext for a new orientation. The sensible physical means for the intermediate transmission of the physical force is removed. It is only preserved at the points of impulsion and reception. Eventually, even this must disappear, for when the laws and forces of the supraphysical are studied with the right starting point, the means will infallibly be found for mind directly to seize on the physical energy and speed it accurately upon its errand. There, once we bring ourselves to recognize it, lies the gate that open upon the enormous vistas of the future. Even if we had full knowledge and control of the worlds immediately above matter, there would still be a limitation and still a beyond. The last knot of our bondage is that the point where the external draws into oneness with the internal, and machinery of ego itself becomes subtilized to the vanishing point, and the law of our action is at last unity, embracing and possessing multiplicity, and no longer as now multiplicity struggling towards some figure of unity. There is a central throne of the cosmic knowledge looking out on her widest dominion. There, the empire of oneself with the empire of one's world. There, the life in the eternally consummate being and the realization of his divine nature in our human existence.